Gary, what the hell are you doing? Hydrus shouted, aiming his plasma rifle at the cage. Get away from that beast now! Gary Collins turned away from the nuzzling war beast, holding up his hands. The burly human cargo loader flashed an uneasy grin at the high-ranking Barzan military official, glaring at him from across the loading bay. It's okay, Hydrus. She's friendly, see? I think she likes me. Friendly? That is a Barzan war beast, you idiot. The most deadly creature in the galaxy. It's killed hundreds on the battlefield. Hydrus kept his weapon trained on the cage, finger on the trigger. His reptilian eyes were wide with shock and fear. Gary glanced back at the massive beast, noting its sharp fangs and wicked claws. But the creature just wagged its spiked tail, watching him with a happy, hopeful expression. It whined, pushing its snout against his palm. I think she just wants some love and attention. Poor thing being locked up like this. Gary reached through the bars, scratching behind the warbeast's ear, its eyes half closed in bliss. Love and are you insane, human? We have to keep those monsters sedated at all times, or they'll rip us to shreds. How are you doing that? Hydrus demanded, utterly flabbergasted. Gary shrugged. I'm just petting her like I would any dog back on Earth. He unlatched the cage door and slipped inside as Hydrus squawked in alarm. Who's a good war beast? You are. Yes, you are. Hydrus watched in disbelief as the human cargo loader wrapped his arms around the galaxy's apex predator in a big bear hug. The war beast rumbled happily, nuzzling into him. Nearby, Gary's stunned Drixian co-worker hit record on his holopad. Within hours, that unbelievable footage would be spreading like wildfire across the galactic net, plunging the fearsome Barzan Empire into an unprecedented crisis. As the shocking footage of Gary embracing the warbeast went viral across the galactic net, the human found himself detained by stunned Barzan authorities. Under the harsh glare of an interrogation room's lights, Gary faced down a row of high-ranking Barzan military officers, including a visibly unsettled Hydrus. I'm telling you, I don't fully understand it myself, Gary insisted, meeting his questioner's reptilian gazes. But I think maybe the beast just sensed I meant it no harm, that I wasn't afraid of it. The Barzan officers exchanged skeptical looks. Hydrus leaned forward, scales gleaming. Impossible. War beasts are living weapons, bred for aggression and lethality. What you're suggesting goes against everything we know about their nature. Hey, I'm just telling you what I experienced, Gary said, raising his hands. Why don't you let me show you? The Barzans glanced at each other uncertainly. Then Hydrus nodded. Very well, human. We will test your ability under controlled conditions. But if this is some kind of trick... Hours later, Gary found himself standing before the towering gates of the infamous Xylox Prime Warbeast training compound. The air smelled of belching smoke and acrid chemicals. Barbed wire and crackling plasma fences stretched as far as the eye could see. Hydrus and a phalanx of guards escorted Gary inside, weapons at the ready. Snarls and roars echoed from the compound's depths. Gary felt a bead of sweat trickle down his neck. They entered a cavernous training yard where dozens of war beasts strained against their adamantium restraints, all gnashing teeth and coiled aggression. Barzan beastmasters watched warily from the perimeter, neural prods in hand. Go ahead, beast whisperer, Hydrus said, mandibles twitching. Let's see this miracle of yours. Gary took a deep breath and approached the nearest beast, a hulking monstrosity covered in spines. It lunged at him, snarling, only to be brought up short by its chains. Hey there, big fella, Gary murmured, locking eyes with the creature. It's okay, I'm not going to hurt you. Slowly, carefully, he reached out a hand. The beast growled, then hesitated. It scented the air, nostrils flaring. Then, to the shock of all assembled, it pushed its snout into Gary's palm, rumbling contentedly. Hydrus and the guards gaped as the most vicious beast known to the galaxy clustered around the human, nuzzling him like oversized puppies vying for attention. Gary laughed as he waded through the deadly pack, scratching behind ears and under chins. Well, I'll be damned, Hydrus muttered. Within hours, word had spread across the stars. Every major news feed from the core worlds to the fringe blared variations of the same headline. Beast Whisperer tames Barzan war beasts. Pundits speculated breathlessly about the ramifications. Megacorps slavered at the profit potential in domesticated warbeast. Earth's government scrambled to spin the situation to their advantage. And deep in his throne room on Dominus, Emperor Daxus Carr watched the footage with narrowed eyes, a muscle twitching in his scaled jaw. The galaxy would never be the same. The Imperial shuttle's engines whined as it touched down on the gleaming landing pad of Dominus, the Barzan throne world. Gary peered out the viewport, his eyes widening at the sight of the sprawling Imperial palace. Spires of iridescent crystal stretched skyward, their surfaces reflecting the golden light of twin suns. Hydrus nudged him. "Come on, human! The Emperor awaits." Gary's footsteps echoed through cavernous halls as he was led deeper into the palace. Towering statues of fearsome warbeasts lined the corridors, their stone eyes seeming to follow his every move. The air thrummed with an undercurrent of tension. Finally, they entered the vast throne room. Emperor Daxus Carr sat atop a dais, his scaled form draped in shimmering robes, his reptilian gaze fixed on Gary with predatory intensity. "So," the Emperor's voice boomed, "you are the one who would undo the very foundation of our empire." Gary swallowed hard. "Your Majesty, I—" "Silence," Carr snapped. "I care not for your words. Show me this power of yours." He gestured to a group of beastmasters. "Bring forth the Worldbreaker." The crowd of courtiers parted as a massive set of doors ground open. Gary's breath caught in his throat as an enormous warbeast lumbered into the arena. Its hide was a patchwork of scars, spikes jutting from its shoulders. This was no ordinary beast. This was the stuff of nightmares. The Worldbreaker's baleful eyes locked onto Gary. It roared, the sound reverberating through Gary's bones. "Well, Beast Whisperer?" Emperor Carr's voice dripped with mockery. "Let us see your miracle." Heart pounding, Gary took a tentative step forward. The Worldbreaker's muscles tensed, ready to pounce. Gary forced himself to breathe slowly, evenly. He met the creature's gaze. "Hey there, big guy," he said softly. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." The Worldbreaker hesitated, nostrils flaring. Gary inched closer, hand outstretched. The beast's eyes darted between Gary's face and his open palm. "That's it," Gary murmured. "Easy now." His fingertips brushed against the Worldbreaker's snout. The creature flinched, then leaned into the touch. A low rumble, almost like a purr, emanated from its chest. Gasps echoed through the throne room as Gary began to scratch behind the Worldbreaker's ears. The fearsome beast's eyes half closed in contentment. It nuzzled Gary's chest, nearly knocking him over. "Good boy," Gary laughed, rubbing the Worldbreaker's chin. "Who's a good Worldbreaker? You are." Emperor Carr's fist clenched, his scales flushing dark with rage. "Impossible," he hissed. He surged to his feet, jabbing a clawed finger at Gary. "This human is a threat to everything we stand for. Guards, execute him at once." Plasma rifles whined as they powered up. Gary stumbled back, eyes wide with fear. But before the guards could fire, an ear-splitting roar shook the chamber. The Worldbreaker planted itself between Gary and the guards, lips pulled back in a snarl. It glared at the Emperor, daring anyone to harm its new friend. Silence fell over the throne room. Emperor Carr stared at his prized warbeast in disbelief. After a long moment, he slowly sank back onto his throne. "Stand down," he growled. The guards lowered their weapons, exchanging uneasy glances. Carr's eyes narrowed as he regarded Gary. "It seems we have much to discuss, human. Guards, escort our guest to suitable quarters, and summon my advisors and beastmasters. We have work to do." As Gary was led away, the Worldbreaker, padding protectively at his side, he caught sight of Hydrus. The Barzan official's expression was a mixture of awe and uncertainty. Gary realized that his simple act of kindness may have set in motion events that could reshape the galaxy. He only hoped he was ready for what came next. Gary's newfound celebrity status spread like wildfire across the galaxy. Within days, his face was plastered across every holoscreen, from the core worlds to the outer rim. Tributes and messages of support flooded in from humans and alien species alike. hailing him as a symbol of peace and understanding between races. But not everyone was thrilled by this turn of events. In the shadowy corridors of power, wheels were turning. Gary awoke to the harsh clang of his cell door opening. Two burly Barzan guards stood silhouetted in the doorway, plasma rifles at the ready. "On your feet, human," one growled. "The Emperor demands your presence." Heart pounding, Gary followed them through winding corridors of gleaming crystal. The throne room doors loomed before him, ornate and imposing. As they swung open, Gary's breath caught in his throat. Emperor Daxus Kar sat upon his dais, scaled face impassive. But it was the creature beside him that drew Gary's attention. A monstrous war beast, unlike any he'd ever seen. Its hide was a patchwork of scars and cybernetic enhancements, wickedly curved horns jutting from its skull. This was no ordinary beast. This was Skurg, the World Ripper, the Emperor's personal guard monster. "Approach, Beast Whisperer," Kar's voice boomed across the chamber. "Let us put your vaunted abilities to the ultimate test." Gary swallowed hard, taking a hesitant step forward. Skarg's baleful eyes locked onto him, a low growl rumbling in its chest. The assembled courtiers pressed back against the walls, fear evident on their faces. "Hey there, big fella," Gary murmured, slowly extending his hand. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." Skurg's nostrils flared, scenting the air, its muscles tensed, ready to pounce. Gary forced himself to breathe slowly, evenly, projecting an aura of calm he didn't entirely feel. "That's it," he said softly. "Easy now." His fingertips brushed against Skurg's snout. The beast flinched, then leaned into the touch. A low rumble, almost like a purr, emanated from its chest. Gary began to scratch behind its ears, and Skurg's eyes half closed in contentment. Gasps echoed through the throne room. Emperor Kar's fists clenched, his scales flushing dark with rage. "Impossible," he snarled, surging to his feet. "This human is a threat to everything we stand for. Guards, execute him at once." Plasma rifles whined as they powered up. Gary stumbled back, eyes wide with fear. But before the guards could fire, an ear-splitting roar shook the chamber. Skurg planted itself between Gary and the guards, lips pulled back in a snarl. It glared at the Emperor, daring anyone to harm its new friend. Silence fell over the throne room. Emperor Kar stared at his prized war beast in disbelief. After a long moment, he slowly sank back onto his throne. "Stand down," he growled. The guards lowered their weapons, exchanging uneasy glances. Kar's eyes narrowed as he regarded Gary. "It seems we have much to discuss, human. Guards, escort our guest to the research facilities, and summon my xenoscientists. We have work to do." As Gary was led away, Skurg padding protectively at his side, he caught sight of Hydrus. The Barzan official's expression was a mixture of awe and uncertainty. Deep in the bowels of the Imperial Citadel, Gary found himself in a sterile laboratory. Alien devices hummed and pulsed around him as Barzan scientists poked and prodded, desperate to unravel the secret of his abilities. Days blurred together in a haze of tests and experiments. Gary's only respite came during his closely monitored interactions with the Citadel's war beasts. As he spent time with the creatures, he began to understand the root of their aggression, years of cruel conditioning and abuse. One evening, as Gary was being escorted back to his cell, an explosion rocked the facility. Alarms blared as smoke filled the corridors. Through the chaos, shadowy figures emerged, assassins sent to eliminate the threat Gary posed. But they hadn't counted on Skarg. The massive war beast burst through a wall, roaring its defiance. Gary's guard, a grizzled veteran named Turnik, raised his weapon. "Stand with me, human," Turnik growled, "or we both die here." Side by side, man and alien fought off the assassins, Skurg's massive bulk providing cover. As the last attacker fell, Turnik turned to Gary with newfound respect in his eyes. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "there is more to you than meets the eye." As they made their way through the smoking ruins of the lab, Gary realized his simple act of kindness had set in motion events that could reshape the galaxy. He only hoped he was ready for what came next. As the smoke cleared, Gary surveyed the wreckage of the laboratory. Skarg loomed protectively over him, its cybernetic implants gleaming in the flickering emergency lights. Turnik lowered his weapon, his reptilian features twisted in thought. "Those weren't standard assassins," the Barzan guard muttered. "Someone high up wants you dead, human." Gary nodded grimly. "And I think I know why." He gestured to the destroyed equipment around them. "These tests, the experiments, they're not just about understanding my abilities. They're trying to replicate them, to create an army of beast tamers loyal to the Empire." Turnik's eyes widened. "By the stars," he breathed. "If they succeeded—" "Exactly," Gary said. "But they can't replicate what I do because it's not some mystical power. It's empathy, compassion, everything the Empire has trained out of these creatures." He placed a hand on Skurg's scarred hide. The massive beast rumbled contentedly, nuzzling against him. Turnik watched the interaction, his expression softening. "All my life I've been taught these beasts were mindless weapons," the guard said slowly. "But seeing you with them, perhaps there is another way." Gary met Turnik's gaze. "Help me," he said. "Help me show the galaxy that there's a better path than endless conquest and cruelty." For a long moment, Turnik was silent. Then he nodded. "What's your plan?" Over the next few days, Gary and Turnik worked in secret, planning their escape. They used Gary's daily interactions with the war beasts as cover, slowly winning over more of the creatures and even a few sympathetic guards. Their opportunity came during a training exercise in the Citadel's vast arena. As Gary demonstrated his abilities for a group of visiting dignitaries, Turnik gave the signal. Chaos erupted. War beasts turned on their handlers, not with savage fury but with precise, coordinated movements. Guards loyal to Gary and Turnik disabled the arena's security systems. Within minutes, they had control of the facility. As alarms blared throughout the Citadel, Gary climbed onto Skurg's back. The beast's cybernetic enhancements hummed with power as it smashed through the arena's massive doors. They emerged into the sprawling capital city, a sea of crystalline spires stretching to the horizon. News of their escape spread like wildfire, and soon the streets were filled with cheering crowds. "Look," someone shouted, "it's the Beastkin!" The name spread through the throng. "Beastkin! Beastkin!" Gary felt a swell of hope as he saw the impact of his actions. But that hope was short-lived. The whine of engines filled the air as Imperial dropships descended on the city. Emperor Kar's voice boomed from hovering projectors. "Citizens of the Empire, this human and his followers are enemies of the state. They seek to destabilize our society and destroy our way of life. Assist in their capture, and you will be rewarded. Harbor them, and you will be punished most severely." The crowd's cheers turned to screams as heavily armed troops poured from the dropships. Gary urged Skurg forward, the war beast easily outpacing the soldiers. But he knew this was only the beginning. As they raced through the streets, dodging plasma fire and leaping over barricades, Gary's mind raced. He had started something far bigger than himself. Now he had to find a way to channel this chaos into real change, not just for humanity, but for all the beings suffering under the Empire's cruel regime. Skurg bounded onto a low-hanging balcony, then leapt to the roof of a towering crystal spire. From this vantage point, Gary could see pockets of resistance forming throughout the city. War beasts and their new allies fought alongside ordinary citizens against the Imperial forces. "This is it," Gary murmured, patting Skurg's neck. "The real fight begins now." As the twin suns set behind the distant mountains, casting the city in a golden glow, Gary steeled himself for the battles to come. He had unleashed a force that could reshape the galaxy. Now he had to ensure that force was guided by compassion rather than vengeance. As the Beastkin rebellion spread across the galaxy, Emperor Gruller watched his iron grip on power slowly slip away. Conventional military tactics proved futile against Gary's empathic abilities and the growing army of liberated war beasts. Reports flooded in of entire planetary garrisons switching sides, won over by Gary's message of compassion and cooperation. Gruller paced the opulent halls of his flagship dreadnought, scales flushed dark with frustration. "This cannot continue," he hissed to his advisors. We must adapt our strategy. After days of heated debate, a decision was reached. Gruller's holographic image appeared on communication channels across Triant space. "Citizens of the Empire," he began, his voice uncharacteristically conciliatory. "Recent events have given us cause to re-examine our policies. In the interest of peace, I invite Gary, known to many as the Beastkin, to negotiate aboard my flagship. Together, we can forge a new path forward for all species, under Triant rule." Gary received the message with skepticism. He conferred with Turnic and his inner circle of advisors, weighing the risks against the potential for real change. "It could be a trap," Turnic warned. Gary nodded. "Almost certainly, but if there's even a chance for peaceful resolution, we have to take it." As Gary's shuttle approached the massive dreadnought, Skarg grew restless in the cargo hold, sensing its friend's unease. Gary placed a comforting hand on the warbeast's snout. "Easy, big guy. With luck, we won't need to fight our way out of this one." The docking bay doors slid open, revealing a phalanx of Triant honor guards, led by Grand Admiral Kronic. The Admiral's cybernetic eye glowed an eerie red as he extended a clawed hand in greeting. "Welcome aboard, Beastkin," Kronic said, his tone unnervingly pleasant. "The Emperor awaits you in the Grand Audience Chamber." As they walked through the ship's winding corridors, Gary's instincts screamed danger. He noticed subtle shifts in the honor guard's formation, carefully herding him away from potential escape routes. The audience chamber doors hissed open, revealing not Emperor Gruller, but a cavernous laboratory filled with strange, pulsing machinery. Before Gary could react, energy fields sprang to life around him, pinning him in place. Kronic's false cordiality evaporated. "Did you really think Gruller would treat with you as an equal?" he sneered. "The old fool has grown weak. It's time for new leadership that will crush this pitiful rebellion once and for all." Alarms blared throughout the ship as Kronic's loyalists seized control. On the bridge, Emperor Gruller found himself surrounded by mutinous troops. His last sight was Kronic's smug face on the screen before a plasma bolt ended his reign. In the laboratory, Gary struggled against his bonds as Triant scientists swarmed around him. A holographic display flickered to life, showing a complex molecular structure. "Behold," Kronic gloated, "the product of our most brilliant xenobiologists, a virus engineered to sever the empathic connections you've so carefully cultivated. Soon, your precious beast will revert to the savage weapons they were always meant to be." Gary's heart sank as he watched simulations of the virus spreading across star systems, undoing everything he had worked for. But even as despair threatened to overwhelm him, he felt a faint tremor through the deck plates, a familiar vibration he had come to associate with Skurg's thunderous footfalls. A muffled roar echoed through the ship, followed by the sound of tearing metal. Kronic whirled towards the laboratory entrance, his cybernetic eye pulsing rapidly. "Impossible," he snarled. "No beast could break through our security protocols." But Gary allowed himself a small smile. He knew that where Skarg led, others would follow. The real battle for the future of the galaxy was about to begin. The laboratory doors burst inward, metal screeching as Skurg's massive form barreled through. Behind the war beast, a tide of liberated creatures and rebel soldiers poured into the chamber. Kronic's eyes widened in disbelief as his carefully laid plans crumbled around him. In the ensuing chaos, Gary felt the energy field binding him flicker and fail. He stumbled forward, catching himself on a nearby console. Through the haze of battle, he locked eyes with Kronic. The Admiral snarled, his cybernetic implants glowing an angry red as he raised a weapon. Before he could fire, Skurg's massive tail whipped around, catching Kronic in the midsection and sending him crashing into a bank of delicate equipment. Sparks flew as the virus containment systems ruptured. "No!" Kronic howled. "You've doomed us all!" But as alarms blared and emergency containment protocols engaged, Gary realized something extraordinary. The virus, designed to sever empathic connections, was having no effect on the liberated war beasts. If anything, their coordinated efforts seemed even more precise, more determined. As the last of Kronic's forces fell, Gary approached the Admiral's broken form. "You never understood," he said softly. What we have isn't some trick or genetic quirk you can erase. It's trust, compassion, something your empire could never replicate. In the days that followed, the ripples of Kronek's failed coup spread across Triant space. With the old guard's final play crushed, the path for true reform lay open. Gary found himself at the center of a whirlwind of activity as a new civilian council took shape. Zura, a respected Triant diplomat known for her progressive views, emerged as a unifying voice. "We stand at a crossroads," she announced to a gathered crowd of humans, Triants, and myriad other species. "The old ways of conquest and subjugation have failed us. It is time to forge a new path, one of cooperation and mutual respect." Gary nodded in agreement, but he knew the road ahead would not be easy. Already, reports were filtering in of hardline factions resisting the changes. The so-called Purge Legions, remnants of the old Imperial forces, were staging hit-and-run attacks on outlying systems. As he pored over intelligence reports with Turnik, now head of the new government's security forces, Gary felt a chill run down his spine. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a series of shipping manifests. "These weapon designs, they're based on Kronek's negation virus research." Turnik's scales darkened with concern. Someone's been funneling this data to outside interests. But who? Their answer came in the form of a coded transmission, intercepted from a human colonial authority outpost. The message, once decrypted, revealed a web of conspiracy reaching back to Earth itself. At its center sat Maverick Cord, the HCA's Earth-based director. He's been playing both sides, Gary realized, keeping the conflict going to maintain human control over resource-rich systems. As the fledgling government worked to stabilize its territories, Gary found himself thrust into the role of diplomat. Against the protests of his security detail, he insisted on making personal appearances across former Triant space. "The people need to see what we're fighting for," he argued. "Not just humans or Triants, but all of us working together." On the industrial world of Kyria, Gary stood before a crowd of wary citizens, a mix of native Kyrians, human colonists, and Triant overseers. As he spoke of unity and shared purpose, he failed to notice the hooded figure slipping through the crowd. A sudden, sharp pain in his arm made Gary stumble mid-sentence. He looked down to see a thin metallic dart protruding from his skin. Almost immediately, he felt his connection to the nearby war beast, always a comforting presence in his mind, begin to fade. As security forces swarmed around him and the crowd erupted in panic, Gary locked eyes with his attacker. The assassin's hood fell back, revealing the cold, determined features of a Purge Legion operative. Gary's vision swam as the negation serum coursed through his system. He could hear Skarg's confused, frightened roars growing distant, as if heard through water. But even as darkness closed in around him, Gary clung to one thought. This was a long way to go. The assassin might have severed his empathic abilities, but they could never erase the bonds of trust and loyalty he had forged. Somewhere out there, he knew, his allies were already moving to counter this attack, and he would be there to see it through, despite the toll. Gary's eyes snapped open, his breath ragged as he fought against the lingering effects of the negation serum. The sterile white walls of a medical bay slowly came into focus. He tried to sit up, but a firm hand gently pressed him back onto the bed. "Easy there, Ambassador," Zura's familiar voice soothed. "You've been through quite an ordeal." As Gary's vision cleared, he saw the Triant diplomat standing beside his bed, her scales shimmering with concern. Behind her, Turnik paced nervously, his tail twitching. "How long was I out?" Gary croaked, his throat dry. 3 days, Turnik replied. "The assassin's weapon was more sophisticated than we anticipated. It took our best xenobiologists working around the clock to counteract its effects." Gary closed his eyes, reaching out with his mind. He felt a wave of relief as the comforting presence of nearby war beasts washed over him. The connection was weaker than before, but it was there. "We've neutralized Maverick Cord's bioweapons operation," Zura informed him, her voice tinged with pride. "The human colonial authority has disavowed his actions and pledged full cooperation with our investigators." Over the next few weeks, as Gary regained his strength, he witnessed the birth of a new era. Zura was formally elected as the first sovereign of the United Worlds Alliance, a coalition of species dedicated to cooperation and mutual understanding. In a private meeting with the newly elected sovereign, Gary found himself tasked with a monumental responsibility. "We need you, Gary," Zura said, her eyes gleaming with dedication. "As our special ambassador, you can show skeptical civilizations the true power of the beastkin philosophy. Many still cling to the old ways of subjugation and control. You can change their minds." Gary nodded, feeling the weight of the galaxy on his shoulders. "I'll do my best," he promised. His diplomatic tour of the outer fringe colonies began on the desert world of Talos Prime. As Gary stepped off his transport, Skarg by his side, he was met with a sea of wary faces. Humans, Triants, and the native Talosians watched him with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. "I know many of you fear change," Gary began, his voice carrying across the windswept plaza. "But I'm not here to conquer or control. I'm here to show you a better way." Over the next several hours, Gary demonstrated the power of empathic connection. He worked alongside Talosian biosentries, massive creatures adapted to the harsh desert environment, to help repair a damaged water reclamation plant. The crowd watched in awe as human, Triant, and Talosian worked in perfect harmony, guided by Gary's gentle mental nudges. As the twin suns set, casting long shadows across the sand-swept city, Gary sensed a shift in the crowd's attitude. Where there had been fear and mistrust, he now felt curiosity and hope. Similar scenes played out across dozens of worlds. Gary's diplomatic mission inspired mass disarmament of militarized surrogates, as species after species embraced the beastkin philosophy of partnership and mutual respect. But not everyone welcomed this new era of cooperation. On the bridge of the warship Unyielding Fist, Admiral Drock watched Gary's tour with growing disgust. The grizzled Triant veteran thumped his hand against a console, causing his subordinates to flinch. "This rejection of our natural dominance is an abomination," Drock snarled. "We must act now, before it's too late." As Gary's diplomatic consort approached the agricultural world of Drukos, alarms blared throughout the ship. On the interface, a massive armada of warships dropped out of hyperspace, their weapons primed and ready. "Incoming transmission," the communications officer reported, her voice tight with fear. Admiral Drock's scarred visage filled the screen, his cybernetic eye glowing with malevolent purpose. "Attention, beastkin collaborators," he growled. "Your reign of weakness ends now. Surrender the human Gary to us, or watch as we unleash hell upon this planet." Before Gary could respond, a blinding flash lit up the view screen. Moments later, the ship rocked violently as Drock's forces opened fire. "Evasive maneuvers," Gary shouted, clinging to a nearby console. But it was too late. Another direct hit sent the ship spinning out of control, plummeting towards the surface of Drukos. As emergency klaxons wailed and the deck buckled beneath him, Gary's last conscious thought was of Skurg, trapped in the cargo hold below. Then darkness claimed him once more. When Gary awoke, he found himself in a stark metal cell. The familiar presence of his beastkin allies was gone, replaced by an eerie silence in his mind. As he struggled to his feet, the cell door slid open with a hiss. Admiral Drock strode in, flanked by heavily armed guards. In his clawed hand, he held a vial of sickly green liquid. "Welcome aboard the Unyielding Fist, Gary," Drock sneered. "I have a proposition for you." Gary's eyes narrowed as he stared at the vial in Drock's hand. "Your proposition doesn't interest me, Admiral," he said, his voice steady despite the lingering effects of his ordeal. Drock's cybernetic eye pulsed with anger. "You misunderstand, human. This isn't a negotiation. You will submit to the negation purge, or watch as we cleanse every beastkin-infested world." Gary stood tall, meeting Drock's gaze. "You're asking me to betray everything we've built. I won't do it." The Admiral's scales darkened with rage. He barked an order into his communicator, and moments later, the cell's view screen flickered to life. Gary's heart sank as he saw multiple Alliance worlds under simultaneous attack. "Your stubbornness has consequences," Drock snarled. Gary watched in horror as Beastkin ambassadors were rounded up by Purge forces, wielding strange weapons that severed empathic bonds on contact. On New Avalon, a jewel of interspecies cooperation, terrified refugees huddled in shelters as Purge ships loomed overhead. "This is your last chance," Drock said, gesturing to the vial. "Take the negation serum willingly, or I'll release it on New Avalon's population centers." Gary's mind raced. He couldn't give in, but he couldn't let innocent people die. As the unyielding fist descended towards New Avalon's primary hive arcology, Gary felt a faint tickle at the edge of his consciousness. He closed his eyes, reaching out with his empathic senses. There, a network of presences, not quite alive but not fully machine, the ship's biosentry matrix linked to countless security drones. "Well?" Drock demanded, growing impatient. Gary's eyes snapped open. "I have a counteroffer." Before Drock could react, Gary threw himself into a deep meta-connective rapport with the ship's systems. The biosentry matrix responded, recognizing his empathic touch. Through it, Gary seized control of the security drones. Alarms blared as drones turned on their purge masters. Drock roared in fury, but it was too late. Gary guided the drones to critical systems, initiating a cascade of failures throughout the massive warship. "What have you done?" Drock bellowed as the deck lurched beneath him. Gary allowed himself a grim smile. "Saved New Avalon, even if it cost me everything." The unyielding fist shuddered, its weapon systems going dark as it veered away from the planet below. Drock's guards scrambled to restrain Gary, but the ship's violent maneuvers sent them sprawling. As Gary struggled to maintain his connection to the drones, the view screen flickered with urgent reports. Across Alliance space, Purge sleeper agents had activated, releasing the negation virus in multiple systems. The empathic bonds that formed the backbone of the Alliance's defenses were crumbling. Gary's heart sank as he watched world after world fall to the Purge offensive. The victory over Drock's flagship felt hollow in the face of such widespread devastation. The ship's comms crackled to life with an emergency broadcast from Sovereign Zura. Her voice was strained but resolute as she ordered a mass evacuation of civilians from contested systems. "To all Beastkin and their allies," Zura declared, "we enact the Arcology Accords. Our strength lies not in territory, but in our bonds. We will regroup, we will endure, and we will reclaim what was lost." As Drock's crippled ship drifted in space, Gary felt a mix of sorrow and persistence. The Purge had struck a devastating blow, but this was not nearly finished. He closed his eyes, reaching out to the faint empathic echoes of his scattered allies. Somewhere out there, Skirg and the others were fighting on, and soon Gary would rejoin them in the struggle to come. Gary stumbled out of the escape pod onto the lush surface of Elora. The sanctuary world's verdant landscape stretched before him, a stark contrast to the chaos he had just escaped. Nearby, other pods touched down, disgorging weary refugees from across Alliance space. Zura's voice crackled over the emergency comms. "All survivors, make your way to the biospheric shelters. Security teams are en route to guide you." As Gary helped fellow refugees navigate the unfamiliar terrain, he caught glimpses of Elora's vast biospheric domes rising in the distance. These massive structures, designed to house entire ecosystems, now served as the last bastion of the Beastkin Alliance. Days blurred together as the survivors established a semblance of order within their new home. Gary worked tirelessly alongside Zura and the remaining Alliance leadership, coordinating relief efforts and bolstering defenses. Yet a gnawing unease persisted. "Our long-range sensors have picked up something," a technician reported during a tense briefing. "Multiple signatures, closing fast." Zura's scales darkened. "Purge forces, they've tracked us here." As the Alliance scrambled to prepare, Gary felt a familiar presence brush against his mind. Zach, returned from a recon mission, stood in the doorway. "I have a plan," Zach announced, his eyes burning with dedication. "But it's risky. We need to hit them before they can deploy their negation arsenal." Gary watched as Zach outlined his strategy, a preemptive strike against the Purge Command Nexus. It was audacious, perhaps suicidal, but it might be their only chance. I'll lead the vanguard myself, Zack concluded. As the strike team prepared to depart, Gary gripped Zack's shoulder. No words were needed. Their empathic bond conveyed volumes. Zack nodded, then boarded the stealth transport. Hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Then abruptly, alarms blared throughout the complex. Gary sprinted to the command center, his heart racing. On the main view screen, a nightmarish scene unfolded. Zack stood face to face with a man Gary had hoped never to see again. Maverick Cord. Behind Cord, the insignia of the Black Anvil Corporation loomed ominously. "Do you truly believe you've won?" Cord's voice dripped with malice. "You've merely delayed the inevitable." With a cruel smile, Cord activated a glowing device. "Behold the Terminus Protocol, the end of your precious beastkin resonances." Horrified gasps filled the command center as reports flooded in. A rapidly spreading contagion was severing empathic bonds across the battlefield. Both beastkin and purge forces alike succumbed, their coherent essences fracturing into primal, animalistic shadows. On screen, Zack lunged at Cord. The two grappled, locked in desperate combat as chaos erupted around them. Gary watched, helpless, as his friend's movements became increasingly erratic, the negation virus taking hold. With a final Herculean effort, Zack seized Cord's head between his hands. Both men convulsed, caught in some terrible psychic feedback loop. Then abruptly, Cord collapsed, his eyes vacant. Zack staggered, blood trickling from his nose. He turned to the camera, his gaze unfocused. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "It's done." The screen went dark as the Terminus event consumed everything in its path. Alarms shrieked throughout the Allura complex. "We have no choice," Zura's voice cut through the pandemonium. "Initiate emergency protocols. All remaining ships, prepare for immediate exodus." As the survivors rushed to board the evacuation fleet, Gary cast one last look at the view screens showing Allura's surface. The lush world that had been their final sanctuary was already withering, consumed by the entropic cascade of the Terminus Protocol. The fleet surged into slipstream, leaving behind the dying echoes of a galactic civilization. Yet as they hurtled into the unknown frontiers beyond the rimworlds, Gary felt something. A whisper at the edge of perception, a faint resonance unlike anything he had experienced before. He turned to Zura, seeing a glimmer of recognition in her eyes. "Do you feel that?" he asked. The Sovereign nodded, her gaze fixed on the swirling slipstream outside. "Yes, it seems our journey is not nearly finished."
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.